Recoloring artwork in Illustrator. So I'm going to open up the color guide panel, and if you don't see it listed in your panel dock, go under Window and Color Guide, and I am going to detach that from the dock so I can see that with the addition of my color and swatches panel. So the color guide is basically where we access this entire Recolor Artwork feature. This is a color management tool in Illustrator. And like I said, find it in the color guide. I'm going to click down at the bottom where it says Edit Colors. So this is really the dialog box where everything happens. And it's really a way that we can do dynamic color manipulations for an entire illustration, potentially being a huge time saver. So in this color guide panel, now note I do not have anything selected right now. So we're okay by just exploring a little bit. We are not going to recolor anything because nothing is selected. So what I can do here is do lots of fun things with editing color. If I were to choose a color, I could set for my current base, and I do that by changing my foreground or my fill color. I'm going to cancel this for a moment, and let's just look at this panel before we enter in. I'm going to detach my swatches, and we'll put clean up here a little bit so it's easier to see what's going on. All right, so in color guide, what we see, my current color, and this is my base color, which goes by default off of that fill color. So when I click a swatch, any swatch, in my swatches panel, notice that I now see this color right here, and if I click it, it will set. If it hasn't changed already, it will set, and so this becomes my base color for my harmony rules. Now I can choose a harmony rule with this drop down box, and the harmony rules are based off of color theory, some of those color relationships that we talk about. So complementary being colors that are opposite each other on a color wheel. We have analogous. Analogous are colors right next to each other on the color wheel. Analogous gives a very harmonized feel. Monochromatic being one color. A triad basically are three colors equally spaced around the color wheel. A tetrad are four colors equally spaced around the color wheel. Then we have some others as compound, high contrast, and then pentagram at the very bottom is a 5-color combination. This is helpful if you have 5 colors in your illustration that you need to change. All right, so I'm going to choose analogous, and that means I'm in this color rule for this selected color. Because I have not selected anything, my object doesn't change, but what it does is it loads in here then a set of variations, and that's what we call this area down here. So I can modify basically shades and tints. I can go do some vivid muted kind of colors here. So as I set a base color, now I have everything applied to it, and I can go ahead and edit. So without actually recoloring, I can use my color guide just as a basis for some colors. So I can click and choose colors from my variations here. One thing that Illustrator does offer is called isolation mode. And isolation mode can be entered into in a couple different ways. Basically, it allows me to really focus on a specific area, and the remaining objects then become dimmed or unselectable. So if I select either an object, or if there's a group that has been grouped, I can then use that as well. So if I click on this one, it's selected. Up at the very top here, I have a isolation mode button, isolate selected objects button. It appears up here on the control panel. When I click it, I enter into isolation mode. If I click it again, I can exit it. So basically that allows me to enter in and really look at that one specific object, okay? Now, I also see that I have a breadcrumb trail here, and I can actually backtrack here if I want as well. That is the same thing. If I click on an object and do a double click, and some of you maybe have done this and wondered, what did I just do? Everything grayed out. This is isolation mode as well. So now I can see where I am in, how deep I am in. And you can backtrack here. This is called a breadcrumb trail. If you want to go all the way back, you'll use the left arrow until this breadcrumb trail disappears. Then I know I'm in normal editing mode. All right, so let's look at how we can recolor artwork. And this is a little confusing. Just practice with it. It's a little overwhelming maybe at first, but I think after some practice you'll understand. So I'm going to actually revert this back to how I started because I want to see those original colors and the relationships so that I can do my editing. So there are two modes when I go into assigning my colors within that Recolor Artwork dialog box. And let's just click on this again to see it. So I have an edit mode and I have an assign mode. Oh, you know what? I'm going to cancel this and I'm going to first select everything and then enter in because now I mean business. I am going to start changing color. So I have this Recolor dialog box and I have two modes, and now these will light up because I actually have something selected, and you can actually see something has dramatically happened already. So I have an assign mode and I have an edit mode, and you can see all that's changing is this area here. So those are the two different modes that I can work in. Now the assign mode is something that you choose the harmony rule and you see the colors and how it's altered. So prior to entering in, I had oranges, browns, and yellows, two different types of yellow, black, and white on my illustration. Notice that with my selected color harmony up here, and I can still change it. This is exactly what I saw previously. I have the analogous color scheme up there. You can see the colors that I've chose working off of this base color that I had selected earlier. It then converted, so all of the oranges turned pink. All of the browns turned this kind of reddish color. The darker, deeper yellow turned a deeper red. The lighter yellow turned purple. And one of my blacks turned violet, and then my white stayed consistent. And you can see if I slide this off that you can see that happening here. So that is the assign. Now the edit is maybe visually easier to understand because it basically is the color wheel, and I can slide this around. And because of the harmony that I've selected, it sticks together. They work together. Okay, so in edit mode, I have some tools here as well, such as the hue, which I can either drag it around myself or I can slide the hue slider, and you can see how it's going to update it out here. Okay, as I keep dragging, you can see how it's changing that. All right, so that's the hue. Then I also have my saturation, and as I desaturate this, my little color indicators move inwards on the color wheel, and same with brightness. As I decrease the brightness, you can see that it's becoming darker. So that's percentages. So I have options to change those. I also have options to do an unlink, to unlink my harmony colors. So if you understand color, you know what you're doing, you can unclick it. My solid lines turn into dotted lines, and now I'm able to basically exit out of my harmony and choose the colors that I want. And you can see that happening here. Again, if I want to desaturate, I slide it in. If I want to change the brightness, I can change it down here. Okay, so that's the way that we can use edit. Now I'm going to cancel. Actually, I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to enter in. This is, remember what my object looked like prior. Now let's enter back in. This time let's work under the, instead of edit, let's work under assign. So in assign, I can test different color groups. This is really a nice tool to use. So I can use some of these groups over here if I'd like as well. I can change, and I can select a color group there. I can choose a preset here, which we'll come back to as far as how to force colors to go in a direction. So here I can see my colors. Now, if I wanted to, I could double click on this little thumbnail and I could actually change my color here. If I felt this wasn't quite the right color, I could change it, click OK. You can now see that this is a different color that's been applied. I can choose to delete it by right-clicking and remove the color. I can choose to add a new color if I wanted to, turn my white to a different color. So you can add and remove. Remember to edit, you just double click on it. Now here what has happened is that my forcing colors, now it reduced it, so now my browns and my oranges are forcing to this color. I can change that by just clicking and dragging, and look at the different effect you get. So if I want my blacks to be not applied, I'm going to move them down. So now my black and my white stay the same. There's no color that it's being changed to, whereas these other ones are being changed. So you basically click and drag, double click here to change, and there you go. So right now I have 5 colors. If I wanted to change this down to only 2 colors, I can do that. I can also use a color library, a 2-color job, which will open up basically a library that I may want to use, so I can choose one. So if I'm going to use a Pantone, which by the way, most 2-color jobs use black and a Pantone color, I could do that. So here I'm forcing, and basically all of these colors that were in my previous are now moved to this magenta color. However, you can see it's working with the scales of a tint, because that means that I'm not having one solid color that looks flat. Okay, so I could remove this color. Oh, let's remove it. Let's remove it. Let's use the whole thing and remove that whole thing. So now I have basically pink and black, and that is my 2-color print job. So if I click OK, there it is. Okay. Now if I wanted to, I can put my save icon to my swatches, and here it is. So it's just this Pantone color along with black, so I'm ready to print a 2-color print job in a much cheaper method than using full 4-color. Alright, so the best thing to do here with this Recolor artwork is get a simple graphic. Even just simple boxes and circles would work. Color them, then enter into this Recolor dialog box and start playing around with what you can do under Edit and Assign. Now remember, it's not going to be active unless you have something selected, so make sure you have your object selected, then enter in, and you can see how then you can play. Now I'm limited at this point because I've reduced the colors, so I would suggest starting with many colors in your illustration and play around with this tool. So that's the Recolor artwork. It's a dynamic way of changing color very quickly for an entire illustration. A little bit higher learning curve, so some practice is needed.